Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Brielle Stark. I'm from Indiana University Bloomington. I'm an assistant professor here in speech, language, and hearing sciences. I'm also in the program for neuroscience. My area of research generally is the neurobiology of language, but I investigate it through the behavioral lens as well, with a specific emphasis on spoken discourse. So today I'm super excited to have two of my study personnel, so Ann Hittson and Ashleigh Doub, who are going to be doing the majority of this presentation, talking about a virtual study we just finished, which was a test-retest design that we'll explain to you a little bit more in a few slides. And really this is meant to be very much discussion based. So we are hoping not to spend too much time, maybe about half an hour, going through what we did in terms of methods. And then we're going to open it up to questions, discussion, very much informal. And hopefully we'll have a great conversation. So sorry about the beeps. There's some people still joining us. If you just joined, go ahead and mute your microphones, and there will be a point at the end where we can all unmute and have a good discussion about this. All right. Few acknowledgments. So this project that we're going to describe here is funded by the American Speech Language Hearing Foundation, or the ASH Foundation, for a new investigator grant to me, which was given to me last November, and which has supported this entire study as well as our study personnel. So big thanks to them. And big thanks to our study personnel, participants in general, for spending so much time on this study. You'll see how much time that is in a second, given our test-retest design. But it was a lot of great participation from all involved. And of course, our fantastic lab members who have been helping us with data analysis throughout this entire process. And a little plug, I know you're all here, you know our website already, but just to plug it, we are a group of individuals who are very interested in improving the evidence base around spoken discourse and aphasia. Our website's listed here, and we've just updated our membership page, so you can actually add yourself to our member directory, and then that will go ahead and add you to our Slack channel as well. And that is a great way for us to keep everyone updated on the science around spoken discourse and aphasia. And really, the main goal is to be a networking group of people who have been in this field for a while and people who are just joining it. So it's a really quite a welcoming group, I like to think, and an international one at that. So I'm going to turn it over to Ann, and she's going to talk a little bit about what we'll chat about today, and then we'll get started.
Hi, my name is Ann Hittson, and I am the research coordinator for the Neural Research Lab. It's really great to see everyone here, and I do hope that you and your families have been well throughout these past few months. So here's a general outline of what we're going to delve into during this talk. Like Dr. Stark said, we would like to allocate around 30 minutes to present our material, and then enter into a group discussion with you all afterwards. So please feel free to ask any questions or bring any topics of discussion via the Zoom chat, and we will refer to them later in the presentation. So we're briefly going to look at the premise, parameters, and methods of the study, as well as a breakdown of the interest we received and subsequent enrolled participants. Then we'll focus on three, we'll call them chapters of our experience running this study, starting with the pre-study, which is what happened before the implementation of data collection, including the topics of recruitment, screening, and scheduling of participants, the steps we took to enhance subject retention, which we are proud to report maintained at 100%. And then Ashleigh will head the topic of translation from an in-person to virtual platform and its necessary preparations. The main study will focus on the actual procedures of virtual data collection, describing the methodology we adopted, and most importantly, detailing the important documents that we use to facilitate working virtually. And the post-study or procedures followed once the sessions were complete regards the protocol of data curation, quality assurance of data, and subject payment. And finally, we'll discuss the special considerations regarding working with persons with aphasia virtually, some examples of technical troubleshooting that we came across, and some lessons learned. And now I'll hand it back to Dr. Stark to discuss the premise, parameters, and brief methods.
Thanks, Anne. Let's see if this wants to progress. There we go. So the overall goal of this study was to really evaluate the stability of certain metrics of spoken discourse in a short test retest format. So by that, I mean, we retested individuals on the Aphasia Bank protocol, which is a protocol of about 7 to 8 different types of stories, including a personal narrative, a story retell, a procedural description, and several picture descriptions. We had them retell these stories on 2 different days, roughly 10 plus or minus 3 days apart. So what's typically considered in psychology to be a short interval test retest design. And what this allows us to do is to measure inherent change in these individuals' spoken discourse abilities when there's no therapy being added to the mix. So really looking at stability as it comes to play in spoken discourse. In particular, our primary outcomes are looking at correct information units, so more of a productivity, and also an efficiency, so correct information units per minute. These were our 2 primary outcomes for this study. We're still analyzing those, so unfortunately no results today, but I promise in the future. So to look at that, we recruited 2 groups. A group that you'll see is called the NB group, which is just a group of adults that we prospectively age matched to our cohort of persons living with aphasia. In general, we wanted to make sure that they didn't have a history of brain injury or any other developmental or neurological disorder of any kind. And then our persons living with aphasia was our main cohort that we were interested in looking in terms of stability. And we were also interested in keeping this to chronic individuals, or chronic aphasia rather, so at least 6 months after a diagnosis of aphasia, which was the result of an acquired brain injury. So in this study, we weren't looking at, for instance, primary progressive aphasia, which is the result of a neurodegenerative disorder. This was only aphasia after acquired brain injury. We actually collected a few different data points on these individuals, including the spoken discourse battery being our biggest outcome, but we also looked at measures of attention. We did a really detailed demographic intake form, and we did a few, well, what we call a check-in form, which looked at individuals' levels of fatigue, how much they slept the night before, their levels of hunger, how much caffeine they had had, and we did this before every session with these individuals too. So if you see us refer to check-in form, that's what we mean by that. Doesn't want to go forward. There we go. So to summarize what we did for each test session, at the top you can see test session day 1. We would do what we termed screeners. So especially in the matched group that was serving as a control group, we did a cognitive screener to establish that there were no cognitive atypical issues going on in that group. That was actually an exclusion parameter. And then we went through and did other evaluations on that day. If it was in the aphasia group, we went ahead and did a short aphasia battery. We actually did not exclude anyone who had latent aphasia or aphasia scoring above the clinical cutoff, because we were interested in individuals who had latent aphasia or less severe or non-clinical aphasia, but still presented with word-finding difficulties, for instance. Retest session was a little bit shorter. We did an apraxia of speech and also apraxia in terms of limb evaluation in the aphasia group on the second day. And we didn't do that in the control group. So the control group didn't have that apraxia eval on the second day. So the second day was a little bit shorter than the first day overall, which I believe Anne's going to talk to us about in these next few slides. So I'll turn it back over to her.
Here is a breakdown of the interest in and enrolled participants into the study. 75 people registered their interest within around 3 months of recruitment via email and phone. 70 were invited to participate, and we ultimately enrolled 56. And of those 56, 14 did not respond to invitations to schedule their sessions, including 9 from the NB group and 5 from the Persons with Aphasia group. And once scheduled, 5 did not ultimately attend their first scheduled session, including 1 no-show and 4 withdrawals from the study altogether. Within the non-brain damaged group, we completed the test-retest sessions with 24 subjects. They ranged in age from 45 to 77 years, and we had 6 males and 18 females registered. Within the Persons with Aphasia group, we completed test-retest sessions with 25 subjects. They ranged in age from 40 to 79 years old, and we registered 18 males, 7 females. We did recruit nationally, and we were thrilled that of our 49 subjects, 18 states and 4 different time zones were represented, so that was an exciting development. And then going on to subject recruitment. Subject recruitment was conducted predominantly virtually. This was done by flyers posted to social media sites and the lab's website, and also shared with directors of stroke support groups and reaching out to participants from past studies that had registered their interest in participating in future work. Aphasia-friendly flyers facilitating the delineation of information via concise sentences and vocabulary were created and posted to the same platforms as well. And people registering their interest in participating were contacted by myself via email or phone with an invitation to first complete a pre-screening survey to collect some demographic information from them. These surveys were conducted through the HIPAA-compliant REDCap, and people were invited to complete it themselves with a trusted other, and ones who wished to complete it over the phone with me did so, and I filled it out on their behalf. And going on to scheduling. Scheduling was also completed via email or phone, whichever the participant preferred. Because we did recruit nationally, upon scheduling, we first confirmed the time zone of the participant. This was done both to eradicate the possibility of missing a session and to find a session appropriate for both the participant and the investigator. Both test and retest sessions were scheduled simultaneously to ensure that the sessions were within the study's parameters of 10 plus or minus 3 days. And once scheduled, an email was sent including the confirmed date and time of session with the participant's corresponding time zone, a virtual meeting link to join the session, 2 forms, the ideal environment checklist and studies informed consent, which Ashleigh will go into more depth a little later. And in case of persons with aphasia, a list of specific items needed to complete some tasks. These emails were sent to the subject themselves, the investigator, the project manager, the primary investigator, and the lab's email. Reminder emails containing the same information were sent 1 to 2 days prior to the upcoming session, and in the case of the need to reschedule a session, this process was simply repeated. We were quite wary of the possibility of our retention rate falling due to various reasons, so we prioritized methods of maintaining our subject retention. This was done by really sticking to the participants' preferred method of communication, whether that was email or phone, confirmation of time zone during first contact with the participant, the scheduling of sessions simultaneously. And we found that reminder emails were highly valuable. It wasn't uncommon that participants needed to reschedule their session. And additionally, reminders for sessions falling on a Monday were reminded on the previous Friday before the weekend hit. And now I'll hand it over to Ashleigh to talk more about the methodology and design.
As I'm sure many of you also experienced as the nation shut down because of COVID, we had to quickly transfer our project into a more virtual format. So in preparation of that and to translate that study to a virtual format, I spent several hours exploring the various tools that we use Zoom, but whatever video conferencing you guys use. But I spent several hours exploring the tools offered through the video conferencing services. And then on video calls with Anne, making sure that it was feasible to have both of us, the participant and the investigator, using the tools that we found to be able to be beneficial. And I will go into some of that in a little bit later in the presentation. So one of the big things that we did to prepare was, after I found what tools we were going to use to give the data collection, I met with Anne and Bree to kind of help them familiarize themselves with what we found. And then I created the study procedure with various points of technical information, as well as the script and procedures regarding the project itself. And then once we did that, we had a couple of master's students from IU join in, and I trained them through an interactive session. And in this session, we went through the various tools that we had to use, as well as the different testing and assessments that we had for the project, so that they were familiar and comfortable with what they were going to be doing in our data collection sessions. And then after that interactive training session, which encompassed all of our study personnel, they were required to meet with me at least one more time to show proficiency in using Zoom, as well as administering the tests that we had. And then they were required to practice each assessment at least 3 times before they started data collection. And they were highly encouraged to practice more than that. Practice was incredibly important for making sure that we all knew what we were doing and how to use the video conferencing for our benefit. And finally, looking at the experiment fidelity, we did this in several ways. We consistently had the scheduling about 7 days within that 7 to 13, that 10 plus or minus 3 days time set. And we paired our investigators with our subject for both sessions, so that there were no different issues between the different investigators. So one of the ways that was really important for not only the quality of our data, but also making our participants more comfortable, and that helped with our retention, was sending this ideal environment sheet. So in this sheet that we created, at the very beginning, it highlights different things to be aware of, like internet connection, speakers, headphones, that kind of thing. And here's an example of what we were looking at. So distractions is the one I pulled here. And basically it's more in depth about what to be aware of, some tips on how to dress, and making sure everyone knows that you're in a meeting, please don't interrupt. Trying to keep pets out of the room. I frequently had to lock my own cat in the room because she loves being on the screen. And so this just kind of goes more in depth about the different ways that we can make sure that the environment we are testing in is as ideal as possible, given the fact that virtual is not ideal. And then at the end of the sheet, we had a checklist, and here's a little bit of it from our sessions. And we would have the investigators go through this at the beginning of every session to make sure that everyone had everything they needed, consistent internet, clear browsers, headphones, etc., to make sure that the data collection could happen on that day. There were several, a few incidents where we had to reschedule because the internet connection was spotty, or there were audio issues or whatever. So it was really important to do this at the beginning of the session so that we didn't have to worry about data fidelity going through. So if we got this ahead of time, we were able to say, okay, this probably isn't going to work today, so let's reschedule. And so it was really helpful for both investigators and our participants to know what to expect and what to set up. We also included instructions for a loved one or a trusted other in some cases, in whatever cases it was relevant, to help us set up the situation, as well as any other needs that needed to happen. So we had some assessments that had to do with objects that were on the participant's side. And so they would help us make sure that all of those were there and accessible for those sessions. The other really important document that we had for this project was the procedural documents. So for each session, we had a pre-procedures procedure document and a post-procedures document. And in the main procedure document, we started with a checklist of assessments and tasks to make sure that nothing was missed, a checklist of the required material and whether it needed to be a hard copy versus a virtual copy. An example of why we might have a hard copy in a virtual study is if we are doing any kind of live scoring. It is much easier to do that while you are looking at them and writing down. And then within this document, we also had the script for data collection and technical instructions on how to share your screen or where to find things. And then at the very bottom, we had a reminder to follow the session with the post-data collection procedures, which included uploading the video to our secure cloud server and making sure that all of our data in REDCap was uploaded so that it was not forgotten by the investigator at another time. So this is an example of our procedural document. As you can see up at the top, we used a text box with an outline to show the difference between the script itself and any technical information that you might need to know. So in this box, you have bullet points to clearly state what steps you need to take if you forget or need to reference how to get to whatever information you're getting for. As well as using the red bold font for important notes and reminders. So you can see in the second arrow, we have a reminder to speak slowly for any of our investigators that were not quite as familiar with working with people with aphasia, as well as in the box to mute your microphone after you get the prompt to kind of alleviate the background noises while the participant is speaking, as a way to ensure the quality of the recordings for our data. A couple other points, we have the script itself is in quotation marks, whereas any supplementary instructions that might be like here, where if you don't get a response, then we have a second prompt to give. That is all in italics, but then you know that you are going on to another task when it's underlined and bolded, like down at the bottom where we are going into a check-in form instead of our discourse procedures. Okay, now I'm going to hand it over to Anne to talk a little bit about our data curation and quality assurance, as well as subject payment.
Here are the procedures that followed each completed session. As Ashleigh mentioned a little earlier, all investigators followed a set of post-study procedures to ensure that no data was lost or misplaced. Video files of the session were immediately uploaded to the participants folder in the HIPAA-compliant Box Health storage system, and then subsequently deleted from the investigator's computer. The participants' data in REDCap was also updated regarding the confirmation and date of completed assessments, and very importantly, the order of assessment administration. Any paper forms involved in testing were scanned and uploaded to the appropriate Box Health folder and REDCap area. And once investigators completed their preliminary data entry, Ashleigh and I would conduct brief quality assurance checks just to confirm that data entry was there and that there was adequate audio and visual recording. And finally, regarding subject payment, at study completion, electronic gift cards were sent via email from myself with all relevant information needed to access it compiled into a spreadsheet. And for record keeping of subject payment, this spreadsheet was uploaded to the subject's Box Health folder. And now I'll hand it back to Ashleigh to discuss the considerations for working with persons with aphasia.
I was muted. So several of the different things that we took into consideration for working with people with aphasia in a virtual environment, when we used our recruitment and created some very lovely aphasia-friendly flyers that included very concise sentences that had the bolded information for the important information, as well as some visuals to kind of help understand what we were getting at. We also translated our ideal environment checklist and guidelines to a more aphasia-friendly document as well, using that same technique of going to a more concise sentence-based information. We asked that a trusted person was available, so a spouse or grown children or a friend or whatever may be, to help with setup. They often also gave us some additional contextual information. So if our participant couldn't say how they were feeling on the checklist, but they could point to one of the faces that we had as a visual, the trusted person would vocalize that so that we could make sure that we had it documented. As well as occasionally including some background information if it was difficult for the person with aphasia to communicate it for us. Another really important part of this study for working with people with aphasia was our augmentative presentation for informed consent. We collected informed consent verbally in most cases, and so for the people with aphasia, we wanted to make sure we had a presentation that outlined the talking points of the script that I was reading, to make sure that they truly understood and were informed when they were giving their consent to participate in our study. We also included a tips for working with people with aphasia virtually document for our investigators. Just some basic tips. I think that's the next slide, Bri, if you want to move on to the next one. Yeah, so some tips of working with people with aphasia that were a little bit more specific to working virtually, but really the general emphasis was on using supportive communication techniques and helping them, the investigators, be aware of giving encouraging feedback as you're going through the different tasks, as well as in that feedback, avoiding feedback about accuracy, and being prepared to adapt materials and instructions. So as an example, some instructions needed to be restated or simplified so that it was easier to understand what the task was so that we could gather the data from that task. And also just the general reminders of speaking slowly but not unnaturally slow, and being aware that some of the tasks that are difficult and may have emotions attached to it, such as the stroke story discourse, being aware that in those moments you might have to really be engaged and empathetic to those emotions, and maybe take a second to kind of debrief what has been said before moving on to the next task. And this is the last point, the 10, is true for everybody that we worked with, regardless of what population we were working in. It's so important to approach each session with grace for yourself and your participant. This is so new for everyone that more than likely they have not done anything like this before. They may have done group calls where they just talked, but actually interacting with the screen is very different. And you are learning with your participant throughout the study. While we tried to prepare for every scenario that we could possibly think of, things obviously are going to come up and you're going to continue learning as you do your project. So one of the things that I learned after my first or second participant with aphasia that I worked with, the importance of pinning a video so that we can see them even when I'm talking. So basically pinning the video is just making sure that their video is the one that is focused on the recording. And this was important when I was asking them to hold up a pencil or a piece of paper for naming tests and things like that. And so you learn throughout the entire process. This was also why we included in the tips, as well as our different training documents, my phone number and email, as well as Bree's and Anne's, so that if there were any problems and the investigators needed some assistance, they could get a hold of us relatively quickly to be able to do so. I'm going to hand it back over to Anne to discuss a little bit of the different troubleshooting that we did when we came across technical issues.
Yes. Working on a virtual platform, we certainly did come across a few technical difficulties, but they were quite sporadic and easily troubleshooted. Of 98 completed sessions, there were 5 cases of technological malfunction, or occurring at roughly 5% of sessions. On another note, separate from technological malfunction, have a few cases of internet malfunction in which the participants' weak internet connection led to rescheduling of their session. We had 2 cases of loss of video feed as a result of an overload to the computer bandwidth on the participants' end. In both cases, the investigator restarted the meeting and recommended that all computer programs irrelevant to the assessment should be closed. And in both these cases, no data was lost. In a third case of loss of video feed, however, data was unfortunately lost as the video program shut down without warning in the middle of an assessment. In this case, the investigator restarted the meeting and tried to pick up right where they left off. In the final 2 cases of malfunction, the participant couldn't connect, had a hard time connecting to the program's audio system. And again, in both cases, the investigator ended and restarted the meeting, and via a phone call, gave instructions to the participant on how to connect their audio, whether that was through the video conferencing program's setting system or the computer setting. Broadly, another area of troubleshooting we encountered was regarding cursor malfunction. This was primarily seen in older computers. And when the participant did not have adequate control over their cursor and needed it to complete a task, They were encouraged to either respond verbally or to use a pen and paper when appropriate. Fortunately, we did not experience any adverse technological situations that would lead to a reduction in subject retention. And now we'll get to chat about the lessons learned.
All right, just making sure I'm unmuted. So hopefully throughout this whole presentation, which Ashleigh and Anne have done a really fantastic job, we've already pointed out a lot of successful things we've done, a lot of kind of challenges we've overcome. So we wanted this slide to really just bring it together before we jump off into a discussion. We can answer specific questions, but some lessons learned, something that was incredibly gratifying to know and really encouraging was that the test-retest design in a virtual paradigm was feasible in persons living with aphasia as well as age-similar adults without aphasia. This is incredibly useful to know for teleassessment and for design planning in the future. As Anne said, we had 100% retention, which is actually not something we expected. And I think that goes back to both Ashleigh and Anne's efforts to really make sure that all the procedures were followed, a lot of those kind of email and phone reminders as well. Flexibility and transparency in research methods is something that we really learned were important. So that included the recruitment, email reminders for sessions involving a trusted other at certain points, just being very transparent with the potential participants, what we needed and what the study would involve. We also learned that it's really feasible to recruit nationally for virtual studies such as this. As Anne mentioned, we had a lot of states from around the US, and we also had a variety of time zones. We did contain it within the US because of our inclusion parameters for this study, but it wouldn't surprise me if this was very doable, a test-retest design or a teleassessment to do internationally if that is a goal. For instance, evaluating different languages, different dialects across a variety of countries and time zones. Another thing that Ashleigh mentioned is having someone available as a tech consultant or expert. I would say probably Ashleigh is that person for us. She's done a lot of this tech troubleshooting throughout time, but having someone on the as study personnel who has really experienced and learned about the software you're using is super useful. And as Anne said, having some fallback numbers to call in case things go awry was really useful as well. We did encounter a lack of diversity, especially in race and ethnicity with our recruitment methods. You might have seen on that slide that Anne presented, I think we had only a single participant who identified as Hispanic or Latinx. And I believe we had 2 participants who identified as being Black or of 2 or more races. And that is obviously not generalizable in terms of the US population demographics at present. So despite our ability to recruit nationally, our diversity in terms of race and ethnicity in particular was not representative. So we have been thinking a lot about how to better how to improve our recruitment methods, how to work with different groups and different community organizations to improve this. So that is something we know we need to work on for the future. And our recruitment success in general, how we got so many individuals interested is because we used a lot of different networking tools. And a really big shout out to those individuals from Aphasia Access, which is a great community for aphasia, as well as faculty and clinicians involved in support groups and therapy groups, because they really helped us to disseminate this study. Ashleigh and Anne, did you want to add anything here?
No, I think you covered everything.
The only other thing that I think was really helpful that we didn't include in this slide was we also created a document at the beginning that highlighted specific to our video conferencing system that we used, the different steps in a visual format and a written format for investigators to go back to, as well as recording small videos showing how to do things from the investigator's side, because when you go to train people virtually, the host versus the participants, they don't see the same screen. And so trying to train virtually, it was a little bit difficult to show what I saw. So it was much easier to record those mini videos as well as a supplement to our training. And I think that really helped at the very beginning, because no one was really familiar with the programs that we were using in this capacity, to really help everyone feel comfortable giving it a try, because there were several different ways that they could reference material they needed to know to be able to do the data collection.
Yeah, that's a good point. With that, I just want to kind of wrap up and give people an opportunity to ask some questions. You're welcome to ask it in the chat, or you can unmute yourselves. Hopefully we'll be able to navigate that over the next 15 minutes so we don't talk over each other too much. But I also wanted to put a little plug for some upcoming events. We have Jean Gallet coming to talk to us about quantitative assessment of meaningful speech production in PPA. That is very soon. We've got Dr. Manaswita Dutta also coming soon. I think she's on this call, and she's going to talk to us about her doctoral work, which was a very interesting study of executive function, spoken discourse, and psychosocial assessment in aphasia. Her actual talk title is now on the website, so I apologize for not including that here, but you can check it out on the website. Then we've also got a few tutorials coming up, like how to use CLAN, which is a free software to analyze Aphasia Bank, which is an open source database that we just did a session on. You can find it on our YouTube channel. And then Dr. Elise Elborn is coming all the way from Australia, thank goodness for international virtual talks these days, to talk about traumatic brain injury, especially an open source database, TBI Bank, and then measuring change in discourse. And if anyone here would like to give a talk or host a conversation, please just get in touch. We would love to talk more. So with that, I'll just put a little plug for joining us, and I will open the floor to any questions. I'll be able to go back and forth on the slides as well if anyone would like to go back and chat about something. So with that being said, feel free to unmute and ask questions, or I'll go ahead and open the chat. Or Ashleigh and Ann, do you want to see if you can see the chat better than I can? I've got a full screen, so it's hard for me to see.
Yeah, I have the chat pulled up.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, we have a question from Mary. What were the ages of the participants, and how do you think this would work with other age groups?
Anne, you want to talk about that one?
Yeah. So in our non-brain damaged group, our NB group, I think our parameters were 45 to 80 years old. Is that correct?
I think
yeah, we did include participants from 45 to 77. Within our persons with aphasia group, we had parameters of 40 to 80 years old, and we included ages 40 to 79. Ultimately, across the board, working virtually, there were no adverse issues with working within this age group. Concerning potentially a younger age group, I hypothesize would work well, as I think younger generations are as comfortable or more comfortable using virtual platforms. And yeah, I think there's a lot of good potential there.
We got a lot of anecdotal feedback too from participants that I kind of picked up on too, who were pleasantly surprised by how easy it was really to interact. So I think there's quite a bit of comfort that comes from interacting with an experienced investigator really at any age group as well.
There was a follow-up question about how about children, and do we think that parents could help with that? I think it really would come down to the attention of the child, the attention span of the child, rather than technological difficulties. I feel like it really depends on how young you're wanting. You know, high schoolers, middle school, even upper elementary, I feel like are very well adept with technology. So depending on how young you're going, they may not need parental assistance. But I think if
assent.
right, yes, parental consent, very important. But I think if you go much younger than that, it could be beneficial to have the parent available to help with any of the technological aspects of it.
Yeah, and I think something that we did that was really beneficial was we took mandatory breaks. So Ashleigh kind of enforced mandatory breaks throughout the session because a lot of individuals will just want to kind of plow through, and fatigue becomes a big issue, especially in kind of the age group we were working in, as well as you know, stroke and post-stroke recovery is known for fatigue. And so in really enforced breaks were important. And I think that would be equally important for kids too.
Oh, okay.
Another one?
She says, thanks so much. That makes a lot of sense. It's great you were able to have such success with the older ages. Thank you. Mary, if you have any follow-up questions, just let me know and we can talk about it later.
Mm-hmm.
And then Colleen Wilkes says, do you think that this procedure could be generalized to other assessments for adults and/or neurological conditions?
Yeah, I can speak on that. So I'm a person who's interested in cognitive neuroscience of language, but in addition to that, I've done a lot of work in cognitive assessment as well as psychosocial and quality of life assessment. And I think at least speaking about those are definitely able to be done in this format. Some things that we didn't necessarily have to worry about as much, but that would be more difficult to control are assessments that really deal with hearing at a deeper level than what we investigated. We really just ensured that persons could hear us and there was adequate volume. But if you're thinking about doing, for instance, like a lot of assessments that involve the headphones, you might want to think about, you know, getting standardized headphones sent to people. I think for speech in particular, so let's think about maybe audio analysis of speech, which is what a lot of individuals are doing these days if they're looking at either speech disorders or just typical speech patterns. You know, the audio quality is going to be very different depending on the computer you're using. So getting a good noise reduction system maybe later on would be really useful to do any automatic analysis on speech data. But I think if you want really high quality speech data rather than, we were very interested in the language aspect, as long as we could, it was intelligible, we were fine to transcribe it. But if you're interested in the speech envelope itself, I think something to consider would be sending out standardized microphones to individuals in a study if possible. Something that I was kind of thinking about throughout this study if we wanted to pursue something related more to speech.
She says, great, thank you.
Looks like we've got about maybe 6 more minutes if anyone has any other questions. If not, you can email any of us. I think at least my email, no, all of our emails are on the member directory of Focus, so feel free to find us on there and send any of us a follow-up email. We're also very happy to share our materials. They're specialized for what we were collecting, but we can definitely share the backbone of them. Ashleigh worked really hard on those, so I think you know, definitely go from what we've kind of spent time making and making sure that they were useful to use in your studies.
So I had a question.
Yeah.
Great job, Ashleigh and Anne. So my question was about IRB and ethics, and what was your experience, Bri, just kind of dealing with, you know, transitioning to a virtual study, and how did they respond? How hard was it to convince them, basically?
That's a really good question. In terms of IRB, there are two ways to go about kind of getting informed consent. You can do it verbally, or you can do it written. We very much allowed for either in our study, but if we were going to get verbal consent, given that some individuals with aphasia may not prefer that way, we also gave the opportunity for written consent, and in that case we attached it to an email, and we did it that way after we gave the spiel. But in terms of verbal consent, we had to make sure that we had a really clear augmentative PowerPoint that we gave while we were giving the informed consent spiel. And that was really important for us. We asked comprehension questions to make sure they understood the protocol as well, as is typical in this population. But other than that, you know, I think we thought we would hit a lot more snags with people not really wanting to, number one, come onto a virtual platform with people they've never met before. As I said, we recruited from like many different states and time zones. They had no idea who we were. But we didn't really encounter that. Maybe Anne can speak to that. And I think a lot of it goes to Anne being a great coordinator and making people feel comfortable. But we really didn't get much pushback on people feeling, you know, a little awkward in terms of meeting us for the first time, which I was happily surprised about. But I think also a lot of our subjects that wanted to participate heard about the study through trusted people. So they heard about it through their stroke group organizer or their speech language pathologist. So they kind of came in with an aspect of trust.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Maybe one more question if anyone has one. All right. Well, with that, I'll leave you all with this slide. Please feel free to jump over and join us. Totally free to do so. And a big thank you to Ashleigh and Anne, who I'm just over here watching how awesome they've been throughout this entire study and continue to be. So it's been awesome working with them. It's been really fun to figure out how to do a virtual paradigm that involves test and retest with, you know, high retention rates. And I'm really looking forward to people implementing this type of a design or this type of a virtual experience in the future, because I think we've got a lot of exciting opportunities coming at us. So with that, I'll go ahead and end my screen share, and feel free to let people know we're going to post this on YouTube soon. Link on our website will point people there. So thanks all for joining, and have a great Wednesday.